Hi everyone, welcome back. On August 2nd, 2016, 30-year-old Karina Vetrano, who lived in the quiet Howard Beach neighborhood in Queens, New York, went out for her regular solo run. Her father, Phil Vetrano, usually joined her, but he stayed home this time because of a back injury. Karina left her house on 84th Street, just a couple of blocks away from Spring Creek Park, and headed there through the shortest route. She took a path through the brush and vanished from sight. Tragically, Karina wouldn't come back alive from this run. Karina was born on July 12, 1986, into the close-knit family of Philip and Kathy Vetrano. She lived with her parents and older sister, Tana, in a peaceful area with about 29,000 residents, where most people knew each other. Karina attended the same school her father had and graduated with honors from St. John's University in 2015 with a master's degree in speech pathology. Karina lived an active lifestyle. She loved sports and travel and had visited many countries, especially enjoying her trips to Europe. She worked as a speech therapist for autistic children in Manhattan and had a side job as a fitness model and actress. She even tried her hand at writing. Her life was busy, bright, and full of positivity. Karina had many friends and was known for her infectious laugh that filled rooms. She was beloved by many, and her loss left a void in their lives. Her family was very close and supportive. Karina often spent time with her loved ones. Her father, Phil, was a retired firefighter who had been one of the first responders after the 9/11 attacks. Her mother, Kathy, was a homemaker who had beaten cancer and was a strong-spirited woman. On July 12, 2016, Karina celebrated her 30th birthday with family and friends before heading to the French Riviera. A few days after her arrival, a terrorist attack occurred in Nice, killing 85 people. Karina posted on social media that she had been at the attack site less than 24 hours earlier, which deeply worried her family. She soon returned home to the USA, and by the end of July, she had broken up with her boyfriend due to issues in their relationship. On August 2nd, Karina planned to run with her father, but his back injury forced her to go alone. Phil was concerned because the park near their street was a lonely place with tall thickets where homeless people often stayed. However, Karina needed to clear her mind after the breakup and didn't want to miss her upcoming marathon, so she decided to go for her usual run around 5 p.m. She promised her father, Phil, that she would be careful before heading out alone. Karina was dressed in a black sports top, black shorts, and bright green sneakers. She had her phone in hand, listening to music through her headphones. The park was just 2 blocks from home, so Karina took the shortest route. She reached the end of her street, turned left onto a path through the bushes, and kept moving forward, texting friends and listening to music. Sadly, she never made it home. When Karina didn't answer his calls, Phil grew worried. Over an hour had passed, and it was getting dark. He knew his daughter would never run in the dark. Panicked, he turned to a neighbor, who happened to be the police chief, and asked for help. Active search efforts began immediately. While Karina's mother waited anxiously at home, search parties, including units from the 106th Precinct, combed through the tall grass and bushes until sunset. They used dogs and helicopters to aid in the search. As the night wore on, the anxiety among the searchers grew. Detective Barry Brown recalled someone saying out loud, "This is not good." Following his instincts, Phil, a retired firefighter, strayed from the main path and went 60 to 90 feet into the thicket. There, he found his daughter's body. In an interview for the show New York Homicides, the grieving father recounted, "I picked her up and made a sound of true agony. Karina was lying face down, her body covered in bruises and scratches. She was partially naked, her top pulled up, and her lower body exposed." Detectives Brown and Russo noted that her face was bruised, and her front tooth was chipped, indicating she had been punched. There were also signs of sexual assault. The autopsy revealed that Karina had been strangled. She also suffered a head injury from a blunt force blow and had been raped. Although no traces of the rapist's DNA were found on her body, the perpetrator's genetic material was recovered from under Karina's fingernails and from her phone, which was found a few meters away from her body. The next morning, The park was swarming with police searching for clues. The residents of Howard Beach were in shock. Everyone knew and loved Karina, describing her as vivacious, successful, and the perfect daughter. No one could believe what had happened. So many people attended Karina's funeral that the local church couldn't accommodate everyone. Speakers were set up outside to broadcast the ceremony to those who had to remain on the street. The grief-stricken father announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to the capture of his daughter's killer. Investigators received hundreds of calls, but most yielded no results. The offender's DNA sample was loaded into local and national databases, but no matches were found, bringing the investigation back to square one. Detective Brown noted that narrowing down the time frame was crucial. Police examined surveillance camera footage from the area, showing Karina running into Spring Creek Park shortly before the attack. No one appeared to be following her, leading detectives to believe the killer was already in the park and encountered her there. As part of the thorough investigation, police vetted Phil Vetrano, the last person to see Karina alive. Detective Brown said, "I spoke with Phil. He was a very concerned father." Phil blamed himself for not being there, but Karina's parents were quickly ruled out as suspects. Investigators also learned from Karina's friends about a man named Paul, a colleague from a nightclub who had allegedly stalked her after she rejected his advances. However, police cleared Paul after confirming he was at work at the time of the murder. One call during the investigation drew special attention from the police. A Verizon worker reported seeing a suspicious black man in a wool hat running out of the park around the time Karina was killed. Based on the witness's description, a composite sketch of the perpetrator was made public. On August 31, 2016, a former NYPD chief saw the sketch and contacted Robert K. Boyce, the host of the show New York Homicides. The caller, who worked as head of security at a residential building in Brooklyn, said one of the tenants resembled the man in the sketch. Police visited the apartment, but the suspect, known only as Kevin, refused to open the door. The cops staked out his place until he finally came out. Kevin admitted he resembled the composite sketch but refused to voluntarily provide a DNA sample, which alarmed the investigators. Eventually, they obtained a sample from a water bottle Kevin discarded, but it did not match the killer's genetic profile. Once again, the investigation was at a standstill. Months went by with no new leads until January 2017 when Lieutenant Russo, who also lived in Howard Beach, returned to the case. Suddenly, he recalled an incident from May 2016, a couple of months before the murder. At that time, he had noticed a man in a hooded sweatsuit despite the 86 degrees Fahrenheit heat. Suspecting something was off, Russo called the police, but the stranger disappeared before they arrived. The next day, neighbors complained about a similar man in a black and white outfit trespassing into backyards. Russo saw him again and learned his name, 19-year-old Chanel Lewis. Russo thought that was the end of it back then, but in January 2017, the lieutenant had a bad feeling about that past incident. Russo looked into Lewis, who had no criminal history but numerous violations in Spring Creek Park on the Brooklyn side, across from where Karina's body was found. Chief of Detectives Boyce, who called Karina's case a monumental puzzle, received a call from Russo. "There was something in the lieutenant's voice that made me feel this could be the breakthrough," Boyce said. "We jumped on it right away." Detective Barry Brown thought checking out Chanel Lewis was a long shot, but the investigation continued. Chanel was a high school graduate living with his mother, sisters, and their children in the disadvantaged East New York neighborhood bordering Howard Beach. The two areas were connected by Spring Creek Park. Lewis told police he knew the area well, as he liked to walk through the park alone, listening to music and clearing his mind. He readily provided a DNA sample. Officers also spoke with Chanel's teacher, who informed them that Chanel had issues with girls at school. "He once asked if he could bring a knife to class," said Detective Brown. When asked why, he replied, "I want to kill all the girls." He was subsequently suspended. Chanel's father defended his son but inadvertently revealed a key detail. He stated that Lewis couldn't have committed the crime because the day after the murder, he took Chanel to the hospital. There, Chanel received treatment for a hand injury, claiming it was from a fight. Police checked hospitals and found the doctor who examined Lewis. According to the physician, he extracted a foreign object from Chanel's hand, presumably a fragment of Karina's broken tooth. Detective Brown asserted that on February 5, 2017, 6 months after the murder, Chanel Lewis confessed to the attack. He said that on that sunny August day, he had argued with his family and stormed out of the house in a rage. In Spring Creek Park, he saw Karina running towards him. He didn't know her and hadn't planned the attack, but suddenly a terrible intent formed in his mind. As he passed Karina, Lewis assaulted her and knocked her to the ground. He hit her on the head with a rock 5 times. Chanel tried to rape her but couldn't due to her fierce resistance. This enraged him even more and he lost control. Lewis dragged Karina into the bushes, strangled, and violated her. Then he went home with torn clothes. His mother noticed her son looked disheveled and was in a foul mood. Chanel said he had been mugged but refused to file a police report. The next day, his father took him to the hospital to treat scratches and a hand injury allegedly sustained during a street attack. In reality, these were bite marks from Karina. Medical records corroborated this information. A search of Lewis's home found web searches on his phone about Karina's death and crime scene photos. His computer contained queries about DNA, prosecutors' work, punishments for felony offenses, and more. Chanel Lewis, 20 years old, unemployed, and mentally impaired, was charged with second-degree murder and sexual assault. His parents insisted on their son's innocence, describing him as a kind, religious young man. However, information emerged that in school, Lewis had exhibited troubling behavior. Chanel Lewis once threatened to kill all the girls at his school, which led to his transfer to another institution for troubled teens. The trial for Karina Vetrano's murder began on November 5, 2018. Lewis pleaded not guilty to the murder and sexual assault charges, facing 25 years to life in prison. During the trial, Phil Vetrano testified about finding his daughter's body, and jurors watched a video of Lewis's confession. A forensic expert testified that the probability of the crime scene DNA belonging to someone other than Lewis was 1 in 6 trillion. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy described the bodily injuries, including a compressed carotid artery. The defense argued that Phil Vetrano had contaminated the crime scene and that the genetic evidence was tainted. Prosecutors countered by stating that Lewis provided details of the murder that only the perpetrator could know, details that had not been disclosed. The defense insisted the confession was obtained after Lewis was held by police for 12 hours, during which he mistook an investigator for his lawyer. After lengthy discussions, the jury could not reach a consensus. 7 voted to convict and 5 to acquit. On November 21, 2018, the judge declared a mistrial. For the Vetrano family, this was a devastating blow. It is beyond my comprehension how anyone could not draw the conclusion that this man murdered my daughter, Phil Vetrano said. Kathy Vetrano told reporters that despite the defense's rhetoric, Chanel Lewis was unequivocally the one who took Karina's life. A new trial, scheduled for January 22, 2019, was postponed to March. Prosecutors presented additional evidence, including call records showing that Lewis's and Karina's phones were in the same location. On April 1, 2019, after 5 hours of deliberations, Chanel Lewis was found guilty of second-degree murder and first-degree sexual abuse. On April 23, 2019, Lewis was sentenced to life in prison without parole, the maximum penalty sought by prosecutors. The sentencing was met with shouts and applause in the courtroom. Karina's parents felt a sense of relief that justice had been served. The lead prosecutor stated, "We understand why Chanel's mother cannot or will not accept the fact that her son committed this heinous crime, but that does not change the facts. Chanel Lewis was fairly convicted, and the victim's mother received her deserved satisfaction." Lewis went to serve his sentence, complaining about prison conditions and mistreatment by guards. After being transferred to another prison, he was assaulted by inmates, resulting in hospitalization. In memory of Karina, the school she attended now holds an annual charity marathon. Her father and other caring individuals participate in the runs, with all proceeds going to help students. After the trial, Information emerged that police had illegally and coercively collected DNA samples from hundreds of men, including Lewis, without due cause or a warrant, and then stored the genetic data in an unofficial database. Lewis's defense plans to file an appeal, insisting these unlawful evidence-gathering methods were not promptly disclosed at trial. Questions are being raised about a potential conspiracy among law enforcement. Despite this, Karina's loved ones refuse to believe the investigation and trial were biased. "Karina speaks to me every day," Phil Vetrano said. "I picture my baby girl. I picture her alive, and I picture her in heaven. She's unbelievably strong." Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I would appreciate it if you could share your impressions and thoughts in the comments below. Your opinion and feedback are very valuable to me.